it. And I really appreciate this opportunity to share with people this particular path, this particular event. And it's something that I have been part of the Tibetan Bond Path for 12 years. I took vows of refuge with His Holiness Padma Gonpo Rinpoche 12 years ago. And we've been trying to figure out how to introduce this and how to introduce His Holiness. And it was actually my partner who suggested I tell a quick story about how I met him. I had been reading at the time about Tibetan magic, and I found a reference in a book of Tibetan Buddhism about the original religion that was in Tibet, the Tibetan Bon. These were the people who were in Tibet before the Buddhists got there. And they were supposedly these legendary wizards whom George Lucas had based the Jedi and the Sith on. And when I found this link, or this missing link, I realized that this is what I had been looking for my whole life. And according to the book, they were extinct. These individuals were extinct. So I said to myself, this is what I need to find. 2 weeks later, I was at an event and I met His Holiness. And he was there, and the person that I was with went up and started speaking to him. Now, I had thought he was a Buddhist Lama, but the person that I was with at the time came back and he says he's a Bon master. And I couldn't believe it, because I had just heard reference or found a reference to these wizards 2 weeks before. So I went up to His Holiness and I said, hi, is it true that you are a Bon master? And he says, yes, it is. And I said, can I ask you a question? And he said, sure. And I said, can I read your palm? And he held out both of his hands, and I had never seen, in all the years I had been doing palmistry, I had never seen anything like it, because there was not a single worry line on his hands. And I said, how is it that you have no worry lines on your hands? And he said, I don't worry much. And I said, can you teach me to do this? And that was where it all started. So I would like to introduce His Holiness Padma Gonpo Rinpoche, who is the Western Bon master and who has been teaching people on this path for the majority of his life. Is he? I can't see him.
He is here.
There you are. Okay. Hi, Bonku.
Strangely enough, we are not extinct. We are still around. It's just that we're not based in Tibet necessarily anymore. There was a gentleman by the name of King Trisan who came in and basically tried to wipe us out with 8 military groups, which is kind of impressive. He went and rallied everybody around him and decided to try and kill us all off. So we were kind of the first Tibetans that had to leave Tibet. So that's probably why they think we're extinct, because we aren't necessarily just in Tibet anymore.
The interesting thing about that is when you walk around, especially here in Northern California, in many of the Tibetan areas and the Tibetan shops, when you mention the Bon, they very much know who they are. And there are people out here who are Tibetans who are actually still practicing Bon. So I just thought to start to introduce people to what we're doing, or what you are doing. I'm sorry, I will be doing all I can to spread the word, but what you are doing with this retreat here that's coming up in Northern California. Now, your plan is to build a lakong, or a temple, here in Northern California. Is that correct?
Yes. Actually, it's a little more than that. We're going to build a center there, which allows us to do quite a few different things. There will be a temple there. There's also going to be some, I guess you call them workshops or laboratories, where we'll be doing the actual traditional Tibetan arts as well. So things like casting porbas and the battle weapon that everyone has been amazed by. And so basically we're talking early Bronze Age metalworking, making bells and dorjes and shankrops in the traditional manner, not just like they are now, where you can order them online and they come in, from Ronco, but these are actually designed to do Tibetan work with. And so, for instance, like our Shang crop is actually tuned when it's made to open all 6 doors to each of the 6 realms. If you study Buddhism or any of the Eastern religions, did you know there's 6 classes of beings running around? And so these Shang crops, which is a handbell, is actually tuned to make it so you can talk to all of them at the same time. So we're going to be teaching those kind of arts, and, you know, how to make your own mala and that kind of things as well. But basically what we're doing is we're actually going to transfer the original Bon knowledge to whoever wishes to learn it. And so that's kind of where we're starting with all this.
And the retreat that's coming up is going to be the first event here in Northern California. And it's going to be happening from August 3rd through the 10th. That's 7 days. And I'm going to ask you, for everyone who's been asking and who's been interested.
Days by, and so basically we're talking early Bronze Age metalworking, picking the pen.
That's 7 days. And I'm going to ask you, for everyone who's been asking. I'm seeing you, George. Is that a delay there?
Basically we're talking early Bronze Age metalworking, picking the pen.
That's 7 days. And I'm going to ask you, for everyone who's been asking. I'm seeing you, George. Is that a delay there?
Basically we're talking early Bronze Age metalworking, picking the pen.
I'm getting the feedback there. Okay. You got it.
Better?
You did great, George. Thank you. All right. So there's the technical difficulties out of the way. So I'm going to ask, why is this Rinpoche, why is this retreat important? And because that's the question that people are asking. They want to know, they want to understand why it's important.
Well, this is the first time that I'm aware of ever that these 3 particular empowerments have been done back to back. First of all, the training that's going with them is right out of the Bon tradition. And so we're not making it fluffy necessarily like a lot of people are used to seeing. It's not being given a nice fur coat and good heels. It's actually going to be presented pretty much like you would have learned it if you were in Tibet 1,000 years ago. So it comes at you kind of hard and fast to this kind of retreat, mostly because we want to be able to get everybody started really fast, and we want to give you the most experience you can get in the shortest span of time. And so this particular retreat is going to have the Ikazati practice, which is actually the unborn essence, essentially, of how a being comes into place and how that awareness functions. Then it goes into Vajaklaya, which is one of the biggest, strongest protective deities in all of the Tibetan canons, both Buddhist and Bon. And then we're going into the lion-faced Dakini, which is Senji Dongma, and she's just an amazing energy to work with all the way around. She basically casts back whatever's cast at you, and so we have ways to work with her so that we can cast a blessing at ourselves. She amplifies it and sends it to all of you, and so that's, you know, there's ways to set this up so that it works really, really well and really, really powerfully if you understand how the magic works and how these entities function. So this is a heavily focused retreat on making sure that people come and walk away with the most capability and knowledge they can get in 7 days. And like I said, it's the first time that I know of that it's ever been done back to back like this with those 3 particular deities, which are 3 of the strongest Tibetan magical entities that's in the Tibetan canon.
If I could just interrupt for 1 second. What I've written in the thread here is, if you have any questions for Rinpoche, please put them in the thread. I should have clarified, I'm not talking about personal guidance questions, but general questions about the retreat, about Tibetan Bon, or for Rinpoche, anything of that sort.
Thank you, George. I'm going to add to what Rinpoche just said, that it actually took a year for me to get all of those empowerments. So the fact that that people are going to get them all in a week is pretty intense. And I will tell you from experience, these are very intense and very life-changing empowerments. And George was asking me, well, what are you going to get in this retreat? And I would say that it was one of the hardest questions to answer, because the number of ways that these particular empowerments touched my life became so layered, on so many layers in so many ways. It was very difficult looking back over these years to say, wait, how did that start? Because now I'm looking at it 12 years later going, wow, all of this stuff branched out of these tiny little seeds. That's like saying, how do you say what the beginning of an oak grove is? When you've got all of the trees and all the fruit that they're bearing, how do you get them back to the seed? So with that, I'm simply going to ask Rinpoche, the simplest question I can ask about that is, what will people take away from this retreat?
Well, the first thing they're going to take away is probably some mosquito bites, because we're going to be in a campground. But past that, you're going to have a chance to see what a Tibetan empowerment looks like process-wise, not once, but 3 times, one for each of the deities. And then on top of that, I'm going to explain to them, all of our attendees, exactly how to use what it is you were just given in the daily world in practical terms, so that you can kind of have the cheat codes for how to live. And really, it boils down to if you could modify the space around you so that it's calm and supportive and healing, very simply. And I'm talking not just a singing bowl and some sage, but this stuff actually puts a space together for you at the core, where the space is actually formed. So what you walk away with is, you walk away with some real skills out of this. There's the methods that you're going to learn for being able to do things like change the time of day. I mean, there's time, the day has different kinds of textures, and so there are some times that you might want a specific kind of setting for calming down, or maybe you're in a room full of really nervous or angry people, and you just want to bring them into a calm state. So you could actually change the space in the room to be that time of the day where people typically are more calm. Or you could simply just change it to a calm space. So it depends upon really what you want to do. But this is the methods behind how in Bonn, throughout the centuries, we've been able to manipulate time and space, basically.
If I could just jump in here, we do have a question from Faye. When and where is the retreat? Faye, I just want to mention that in the thread here, I've posted one of Rinpoche's flyers with some great information, and on the bottom, you'll see some of the details.
Thank you, George. Yeah, and we're going to share this afterwards too, and we're going to make sure that the details are all on there. And if you guys would like to contact His Holiness directly, there's a couple of ways. You can friend him on Facebook, and he's been talking directly to people about the retreat there. But also, you can email him at padmagonpo@gmail.com. Let me spell that. padmagonporinpoche@gmail.com. Did I say that right? So I will say that I do remember, I can tell you this from experience. When we first met, I always felt calmer at dusk, and I always felt challenged at that time. And His Holiness would just say to me, just change the time of day, put it at dusk. And at the beginning, that's what I used to do. It's funny because you forget these things, because as I moved on through the path, I didn't have to change the day anymore. I became more adaptable. So in the beginning, as I needed whatever I needed, I could change it. But then as I continued with the path, I found myself more adaptable and not so much needing to do those things, which is the neat thing, that you transform and become more capable of more things. So the next thing I'm going to ask is that, what is the one thing that people in the world are invoking right now that this retreat will give them? So what are people in the world right now invoking the most that this retreat will give them?
Well, for the most part, what we hear in my world is people want knowledge. So that we definitely are going to fill your head with, and we're going to give you practical ways to make it your own. So it's not Bon is not a mystery school or some faith-based religion. In Bon, it's a series of experiments that teach you through direct experience what's really going on, and so you're going to get very solid answers from very first-hand experience for whatever it is that you're trying to learn here. Secondly, we have a number of ways to help people heal, both physically and spiritually. And when you're involved with Bon, you'll have access to that. And during these retreats, they're kind of interesting. I expand time, so the 7 days is going to feel like a lot longer. So there will be time during the retreat for people to ask questions and get kind of a private audience if they want, and basically get to the core of what they really need to know from their perspective, and then we'll be able to do some things there. So they're going to have access to something that they usually would never have an opportunity to meet. This whole thing of Bon, the Bon themselves have a very restrict method of determining who could teach what, and so the teachers in Bon are thoroughly tested and heavily vetted, so they don't end up with somebody out there that doesn't know what's really going on. And so you're getting access to one of those things right up front, and then beyond that, some amazing teachings that can and will actually completely change your life. And if you've been to any kind of retreat before or any kind of teaching before, a lot of the time these particular empowerments will complete the fruit of whatever teaching you started with. And so if you haven't quite received the fruit of whatever it was you were introduced to in the beginning, and that goes for the New Age as well as the Old Age types of religious retreats, you might awaken whatever that was that was planted way back then, and then get it to grow in a healthy way.
You know what? People always ask me about the psychic side of things, which I always emphasize is sort of the tiniest of achievements in terms of what is possible. It's a very small achievement. So I say that so that those of us who actually do this psychic thing don't get full of ourselves. I think you have to approach it with humility. But I will say that before I met, for everyone listening, before I met His Holiness, I started as a professional psychic before I met him, but what I learned after that awakened my ability to do things without cards, without a crystal ball, without having to speak to a guide. I could interact directly with the spirit world and talk to it. And one of the first things that he actually taught me was how to speak to plants. He took me into the woods and he actually taught me how to speak to plants, and the plants spoke back. And then he told me the limits. He taught me the limits of how far that knowledge could go. So there was only a certain amount that a plant could tell you, but it could speak to you from its intelligence. And it was very quick. He took me in the woods and immediately showed me how to do it. I figured out then how I could use it for other things. And then for those of you who've seen me use the Tibetan dice, I was trying to combine in Tibetan, and for those of you who don't know, in Tibetan divination, we create something called a kill core, which is it's kind of a map of a person's life. And we use dice, which have 5 different colors. And I was trying to link the dice to certain numbers. And His Holiness actually told me to talk to a bay leaf tree to connect and tell me what the numbers were. And the tree itself taught me what numbers were linked to what colors, and they worked. It totally worked from there forward. But then His Holiness added the advice. He said, if you find as you move forward that this knowledge starts to change, allow it. Don't cling to it. Allow it. Allow yourself to grow with it, which I think was one of the most valuable things I ever learned. So the abilities that I had started on my own, these teachings helped to awaken, and then he sort of helped fill in some of the missing pieces I had. So some of the things that people have seen me do, they are always asking me how I do it. In some cases, I can't tell them because it came out of something that just sort of emerged as ancillary to this other set of practices.
For those of you who might just be tuning in, we're here today talking with His Holiness Padma Gonpo Rinpoche and Lucky Links about a very special retreat and training in Tibetan Bon, which is going to happen in Northern California, August 3rd through the 10th. And Rinpoche, if I could, I have a question for you. It's kind of like flip side of what Links was asking earlier. What is the relevance of Tibetan Bon, or what we'll be engaged in, to the world right now, in terms of what we're seeing, in terms of turmoil, you know, abuse of human rights, all of the above?
Sure. I guess the place to start with here is, one of the things you gain when you have incredible knowledge and power is you gain freedom. The Bon were not touched at all, basically, when the Chinese invaded Tibet, because they chose not to be. And so the Tibetans, the regular Tibetan lay people still practice a certain amount of Bon as a social practice, I guess you could say. It's became kind of a just an underlying piece of their overall belief structure. The Buddhists were running around trying to be compassionate. Bon is not predestined to put up with much. So if you run up and stick a gun in a Bon person's face, he's liable to take it away from you and beat you on the head with it. So we're not, we don't really like the idea of people dominating others by force, especially since there's no reason for it. All of that stuff comes from dualism and the 12 links of causality, and there's all that's been heavily documented in what is now Tibetan Buddhist doctrine. So what you learn, what you're going to really walk away from here, is you're going to have some strategies that allow you to not have to fear anybody. I mean, and I don't mean you're going to be, a ninja warrior jumping around in the shadows, but I do mean that you're going to be able to shut off a stomach chakra and watch the person fold in half and fall to their knees, trying to get their body to quit cramping. Or you might just make them forget what they were doing in the first place and just wander off into daze. I mean, so we know how energy systems work probably better than anybody on the planet. And so when it comes to things, we know what each of the chakras do and each of the channels do, and how intelligence forms and how the ego works, how people actually interpret the physical connection to their world through the thing that has the experience. And so we know all of these structures, and we spend almost all of our time working in them, because Bon's not, we don't sit on a cushion and just chant all day long. Our perspective is, if you got a mantra or a practice and you can't take it off the cushion, it's pretty useless, because the world is out there. People are out there. If you're going to help them, you got to get up and go out where they're at. And because of that, we tend not to do, we have I guess you can call it kind of a retirement plan. When a teacher starts to get older, that's when they actually create a center, either a lakong or a school or sometimes just what they call research centers, I guess is what it translates to, where they just experiment with new Bon technology and old technology and news technologies being released by people in general. And we try and stay up to date as much as possible. So when they start talking about quantum physics, we're kind of like, well, that was in our doctrine 184,000 years ago. And so, and let us show you how that actually works, because so far you guys are messing it up bad. You don't need all these machines and all this stuff. Let me show you how to make a simple hand gesture and breathe a certain way, and then talk to the space around you to make things shift. And then all of a sudden you're quantum tunneling, which leaves the physicists scratching their head really heavily. And I will say that the elites out there, those people at the very top of deciding who's going to see what, have seen this stuff. We've sat down, we've done demonstrations, they've done tests, they've done all, we've worked inside of programs with them. And it just, they know all about what can be done. They don't want anyone to be able to do it, because if you have that kind of capability and you don't need some gigantic particle accelerator, you just might at some point tell them, no, you don't want to play anymore. So if you're looking for a little bit more freedom, then I would say this is definitely the place you'd want to start, because you're going to learn things here that no one else is teaching. In fact, the Buddhists don't have it. The story the Buddhists even tell is that this sage from down in India by the name of Padma came up and basically plagiarized a whole bunch of Bon training to create the Tibetan Buddhist doctrine. So, they put it in a little bit more reverent structure, but the bottom line is he went in and sat down with the Bonpos and said, what is it you guys do? He wrote it all down. He took as many prayers as in what they call prayers, which we just call mantra formulations, and modified them to reflect the gods and the I guess you say pathology of the Buddhist tradition, and renamed some of them, and then claimed that they beat all the Bon gods up, and now they're gods better than our God, and so which we don't actually necessarily have a God. Our goal is to become that existence just before there's a dual state of being, and so it's right there on the edge where you're aware and able to experience without identifying as a thing specifically experiencing. And then from there, you learn how to manifest in whatever form you need to be. And so, and our test actually is enlightenment. And I don't mean, we sit in a box and read a lot of books. We go into a box and we actually have to produce light. And this is visible, not some auric thing where you're reading auras and that kind of thing. You're actually seeing real tangible light coming off of a person.
Wow.
And so that's the top end test to determine who teaches this, is you actually go to a box for a very long time, over 33 days, producing the light of a triple sun. And that really is, in our world, the only definition of enlightenment, because that's the first one. So that's you're going to learn some things here that set you up to be able to start working towards that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Rinpoche. I appreciate that. For those of you who might just be tuning in, if you have any questions for His Holiness, please feel free to write them in the thread here. We do have a question from Angela. What roles do dragons play in Bon? Links mentioned talking to plants. Can we work with dragons?
Absolutely. You'll learn how to see what's really going on in the sky. There are some pretty impressive Tibetan paintings that shows all kinds of stuff happening in the air above you. A lot of that actually is going on if you could see it. So you'll see that there are dragon-like things flying around up there, and a lot of the time they're scuffling with the Garudas. And a Garuda is kind of it looks kind of like the Eastern gargoyle. He's a human body type with wings and a bird head, and so those two don't generally get along real well. Dragons are driven a lot of the time by pride, and so they get into disagreements because the Garuda are kind of generally upset anyway. so they scuffle. So when we work with dragons, and we work with all classes of entities. So when we work with a dragon, it usually because they have a specific talent that needs to be brought to a situation or a place. When we're doing ransoming, we may actually have a dragon placed near where we're working at to make sure nothing else interferes with it. And similarly, we work with Garudas quite a bit. In fact, when we're setting up our retreat boundaries and stuff, we set up Garuda effigies, kind of like you would a scarecrow, to keep things that would normally come in there and bother us away.
Beautiful. Another question from Dre. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Would love to know how His Holiness found the Bon tradition.
Well, I had a question, actually, that nobody else was able to answer. I was sitting in an embassy in Japan as a child, and they were talking about the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. It was a Sunday school. And so when you're young and you're not really paying terrible close attention to something, and you're not presaged to believe necessarily anything, so I was actually very young. From what I got out of that there was this God and there was this other thing that this God existed in, because you can't be all that exists necessarily in a child's mind. And so I asked the person doing the teaching, if there's a God, what does he live in? And they tried to give me the heaven thing, and I said, so there's a heaven and there's a God. What do they live in? How does all, I want to know basically how this works. And they couldn't answer it. And so in an embassy, you have access to some interesting people like bishops and cardinals and all kinds of interesting dignitaries from all the different religions. And so I'd ask questions and no one was coming up with the answer. Well, on the way to school every day, I'd walk by this Tibetan kind of temple, and they'd be banging on things in there, and you'd hear drums and cymbals and horns and, all kinds of, just to kids, something that sounded like noise making devices. And so I figured I'd stop in there and find out what they thought about it. And so I went in, and there was a guy sitting up on a scaffold painting on the wall, which was kind of cool to a kid. And so he says, hello. And I said, hi. And he says, what can I help you with? And I said, I have a question. And so he says, what's your question? And I told him, what's of God? If God is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, then, what is he exactly in? I mean, what is the container, basically? And he told me that was a good question, and then gave me an answer that actually made a lot of sense. And then I asked him what they did there, and he started to give me kind of what I would consider a canned response, which I wasn't really satisfied with. So I said, no, don't go down that. What I want to know is what you do. And he handed me a bell, and he says, take this and study it and tell me what it is that you learn. Well, what he didn't know is I was friends with the CIA inside the embassy, and so I took it down to the intelligence center and found out everything there was to know about the bell as far as what the CIA could know. And so when I was done at the end of the month, I went back with a significant report telling him pretty much everything about that bell up to that point. So he looked at this pile of papers kind of shocked, and he says, that's a lot of information on this bell. And I said, yeah, this is what the CIA knows about it. I said, so I think I've answered all of your questions. So he goes, what did you think of it? And I said, well, I think it's an interesting way to get attention. And he says, whose? And I said, pretty much anybody's you want. And he says, that's a good answer. And so we from there, I'd ask questions, and they'd tell me, here, go try this. And so that's kind of how we do things. You ask us a question, we're liable to give you a method to use to come up with your own answer. And in that process, you tend to come up with more questions, and before too long, you're moving along fairly fast to filling in the things you've been missing before you even begin. And that's kind of how my first experiences was with this.
Beautiful. Well, that looks like it's it for questions from Facebook for now.
Well,
so
I'm gonna ask the final question that I think this is a big one that people are gonna have. How can this retreat help get people unstuck in their lives? I think we've hinted at it, but I'm going to ask it flat out. How can this retreat help people get unstuck in their lives?
Great question.
Well, one of the things that this is going to do is it's going to completely change your view of what it is you're living in. And so from that shift in view, pretty much you're going to look at everything else in your life differently, I would say. As the empowerments start to ripen in you and you start to play with the techniques and knowledge you gain through the teachings and through the empowerments, and you start to see the effects and principles playing out in front of you, you really can't go back from that. I mean, if it's kind of like if you've been really, really drunk and you've been watching everybody, tipping one way and tipping the other, and it looks like they're kind of in control, but you're not sure they are, and then you suddenly were to wake up and be sober, your world's very different then. And so that's kind of what's going to happen with this. You're going to realize how this all really works. This thing that they call life, right? So if you've got a bunch of patchwork beliefs about metaphysics, this is going to probably clear all that up for you. You're not going to be walking around, grabbing whatever thing appeals to your ego. You're going to sit down and say, hey, wait a minute, this is how this happens. And it's not because I told you, but it's because you've had a chance to experience it directly, firsthand. So I think overall, that's the thing that happens here, is that once you've been introduced to a system that doesn't have room for anything but truth, you really kind of can't be lied to anymore, and you won't be misdirected, and you know, people will tell you that this is the way it works. You look at it and you go, no, that's not how it works. I've seen how it works, and that's completely wrong. And so, and then you could probably do something funny to prove that they don't know what they're talking about if you really want to have a good time. Like I said, the world is a laboratory for us, and so we tend to experiment. And so, as this progresses, you know, the first day you're probably just going to be sitting there going, "Oh my God, what did I get into?" Because the actual empowerments are done in an old ritualistic form. Now, there are no baby sacrifices, and don't worry, there isn't any sexual involvement, so you're all safe. Okay, you won't be getting naked. For those of you that want to, I'm sorry, we don't have time for it. But you may have to put on some ornaments that are part of the empowerment. You may get an awful lot of saffron water and regular water, and you know, maybe even a little whiskey poured on you. I mean, so all of these are blessings of the different chakras and channels and things. So there's a lot of that, and you'll be getting up and down quite a bit because, you know, you get up, you form a line, you go through the line, get your blessings, you go back, sit down, and then, you know, 8.5 minutes later, you're back on your feet again to get the next wave of them. And so, meanwhile, you know, I may be mumbling in Tibetan, and you won't necessarily know what all that means, but it's all part of the way this has been done for thousands of years. And so part of this process is each of you get introduced into the lineage, first of all, of this particular being and its practices and the knowledge that it contains and the history that it's been involved in and all of that by somebody that's part of that lineage and has been living that lineage pretty much most of their life. And then once you've been introduced to lineage, you're introduced to the deity itself. And the term deity has a lot of bad connotations in Western language, but this is an intelligence that has attributes that you're going to learn how to adopt. And so it's not selfish with what it could do. If you can become a good vessel for it, you can actually manifest with its capabilities. And so these are formidable beings. They're not, you know, you're not worshiping some god or ghost. This is actually you being able to channel in those frequencies, those energies, and being able to command them as yourself. And that's pretty big. And so with that, those are the first two pieces. The person presenting it, in this case me, is giving you pretty much everything they got during this empowerment as seeds. And then the question becomes, will you water those seeds or not? Will you practice the things that you've learned? Now, in the canon, Tibetan canon, there's peaceful Buddhas. What they call us Buddhas, but we don't really use that term. To us, a Buddha is a white-colored energy that tends to sit around and ask too many questions. Those of us who are light bringers, which is what the Hindus called us before the term Buddha came up, what we tend to do is, if we're peaceful, then we make you feel really good about yourself. If we're wrathful, we cut through all of the garbage you bring in front of us that's troubling you. And if we're fierce, we might just cut it without necessarily patting you on the head and telling you it's okay, you should get rid of this. We may just help you get rid of this. And so in that category, I am the last of those three. I tend to be very fast acting on people. And so when it comes to this, you know, you might come in and say, you know, I've got this problem and blah, you know, and it goes on and on and on. And I'm liable to just simply remove it from you. And so I'll give you a practice to do, a experiment to conduct, essentially, that will help you readjust your focus, your new view, your all of, you know, whatever it is in your life energy, so it doesn't tip you upside down and empty your pockets. But what it will do is it will create an immediate and a lasting change in the course that your life's heading in. And so that's what this is going to do. I mean, you're going to be experiencing things that are legendary, you know, spooky Tibetan wizardry stuff. And so, and I am going to be doing magic at this thing. So if you're curious about what that looks like, you're going to be doing it with me. So I'll be doing some myself and you'll be learning how to do it. And so that's what we're doing here. This is a very rare opportunity, because normally, even in Bonn, we don't do these kind of retreats. It happens over a much longer span of time. And much slower. And I'm not expecting anybody to walk out of there as, you know, Gandalf the Grey. What I'm expecting, though, is that you will have what you need to be able to develop over the next 12 months into something quite spectacular. And if you, choose to continue with the Bon tradition, what we have in store for you as we put the center together is going to be nothing short than the legendary outcome. So, because we have technology that we really haven't shared, and it's coming to a time in this world when that knowledge needs to be available. And so it's kind of you consider it a tipping point. If we can't stop the men of ill intent from doing what they're doing, everyone's going to end up basically in a hell realm, and we don't really want to see that. So, as they say, drastic measures need to be taken. And so we're bringing this out, and we're presenting what we know from thousands of years of Bon teaching and being around humans and seeing how kings and queens and gods and demons and all that stuff work, to help people be prepared and give them the ability to take control of what's going on in their world. So that's where we're at.
Beautiful. Well, I'm registered for the retreat. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope to see those of you who are listening today or in rebroadcast. I hope to see you there. We're just about out of time now. So, Lynx, do you have anything else that you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
No, that was it. Those were all the questions. I'd like to thank you, George. Thanks, George, for helping to get the word out. I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person.
Me too.
We've known each other virtually for quite a few years now, and this is the first chance we'll get to meet each other in person. So I'm really looking forward to that.
I'm much better looking in person, by the way.
Oh, that's good to know.
You know.
I've always been told I have a good face for radio.
So
I am going to. I'm sorry. What was it? What was that, George?
The retreat is happening August 3rd to the 10th. It will be in Northern California. Once we finish with the live broadcast, we're going to repost it on each of our Facebook pages, and all of the information will be there. So we really look forward to seeing you there. Your Holiness, thank you so much. It's really been just a wonderful, enlightening experience to spend time with you. So thank you for today.
I wish everybody prosperity and good health and joy. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody that wishes to come to the retreat.
Thank you, Lynx. All right, we'll see you all very soon.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Bunku.
Okay, actually, oops.